Hey everyone, welcome to Build on Chain. Today we're hanging out with Will from Syndicate. Hey Will, what's going on?
Yeah, great to chat. I'm excited to dive in.
Awesome. So today we're going to be diving into how Syndicate works and how Syndicate can help you build an app chain and some of the special features of Syndicate's tech stack. So Will, you're going to be presenting today, but before we get into it, what is Syndicate if you had to describe it to the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. In 2021, my co-founder Ian and I, at the very beginning of 2021, we started Syndicate to bring communities on chain. We started out with investment DAOs as the first community, and then expanded
Which were
out
very
to a number
sick,
of
by the way.
NFT.
Extremely cool. Sorry for interrupting you, but extremely
Thank
cool.
you.
I think it was one of my favorite examples of something that crypto enabled that no other technology did.
Yeah. That was probably like it was pre-embedded wallets. ETH mainnet was the only option, so every investment would cost you like $50 in gas fees. There was, all of the things that we know and love today did not exist then. Yeah, the tech exists now, which is exciting. And as we were launching these on-chain communities, starting with investment DAOs, and then a number of NFT communities. And then app chains, we saw that what these communities really needed was the ability to scale very easily, which includes scaling by adding their own chains that they have dedicated block space on. And then what they also need is customization, and that customization can be how the chain works. And that customization decisions, it can live in the hands of the team, or it can live in the hands of the community, where the community decides how to tune revenue on an app chain, or who's allowed onto an app chain, or which assets get priority, and things along those lines. So our testnet is live, jamming with a number of great people on it, including you all. And then our mainnet is going to go live soon.
Sick. Awesome. So today we're going to be doing a little demonstration. Can you talk a little bit about what we're going to be demoing?
Yeah, definitely. So we wanted to talk about how to customize chains, but how to customize chains is kind of pretty abstract. It's a very new primitive, since most people are not customizing sequencers right now. And we wanted to show an example of how flexible this customization was and how easy it was, so that you can customize how transactions are processed for any chain. So we put together a little demo of transaction processing. So we essentially were like, what's the best way to show how this can work? And we basically made transaction processing demos based on the phase of the moon. So this was a fun demo where we're like, okay, there's a bunch of conditions that you might want to operate on. In this case, it's moon phases, but you could imagine it being traffic loads. You could imagine it being launch phases. You could imagine it being network purposes like gaming versus payments versus other use cases. And then based on the moon phase, only certain transaction types are allowed through inside of these customized modules. So essentially, you have like some kind of allow list criteria, so to speak. And then to meet that criteria, you can only do a subset of functions on the chain.
I see. So this is like a way to basically customize the behavior of the rollup. This is just like a fun way to do it. So based on the phase of the moon. But essentially this allows any arbitrary change in the underlying behavior of how the rollup is working or sequencing in general, just on the basis of any arbitrary condition. And this is just a fun example of it, but um, yeah, that would be a correct explanation of what this is, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. We call what we do, we view it as a programmable sequencing layer, and we call it on-chain sequencing. And the reason why is because all of the customizations for what we do is customized inside of smart contracts. And the benefit of that, in addition to it being verifiable, and in addition to it being able to be controlled by, any mechanism, whether it's a multi-sig or governance, you can also have it just be really simple to customize. So like if you wanted to customize a sequencer off chain, you're customizing thousands of lines of code. If you want to customize a sequencer on chain with a smart contract, you're customizing 50 or so lines of code. And that's a huge benefit. Like back in 2013, 2014, I was like working on just like side projects like Bitcoin Core forks for fun, like didn't end up launching them, but like at the time, I saw how hard it was to customize, blockchains back then, which was people would fork the Bitcoin blockchain and they would make either bigger blocks or faster blocks. And that was it, because those were two easy parameters in the code to tune, and you could just put in a new number and launch your own chain. You didn't have to customize the thousands of lines of Bitcoin Core, but doing anything else, you did have to customize thousands and thousands of lines. And where are we right now? Over 10 years later, people are customizing rollups to make bigger blocks or faster blocks, and that's it. But what happens when you can change ordering and put only humans or only AI at the top? What happens when you can change access control? It's like maybe you want to do payments only to KYC users. You could change that and make an access control rule that you must have KYC'd. Or what happens when you want to enshrine certain data? Like, for example, you want to know, what the weather data is for a game, or you want to have up-to-date randomness data, and you want to include that with every single transaction. If you put that all on the sequencer layer and you write that all in smart contracts, it just becomes a very easy developer platform, we hope.
Yeah, I actually think about this all the time, partially just because like a lot of people who are developing now are developing on optimistic stacks. And I always think like, okay, you want to add this custom feature. Are you like making sure that the fault dispute games that's running like the MIPS execution engine in Ethereum like is able to fault proof this? And I don't know if the answer is like yes. I assume the answer is yes most of the time. But this makes it a lot easier because you can just pack any arbitrary arbitrary logic into a smart contract, and like that can already be validated by the OP stacks challenge. Faults.
Exactly, and that's the thing is like, but auditing the framework and having a really rigorous approach to the framework for on-chain sequencing, you can then make any customizations you want and not worry about the security sensitivity of it. Like we're auditing our withdrawal mechanisms, we're auditing our block processing mechanisms. And then as long as you fit within the framework, which you can do anything that you can express in a smart contract, then you're good to go. You don't need to worry about, will fraud proof compatibility still be true if you change this ordering rule. We already have withdrawals that are undergoing audit pretty soon. So once that audit is complete, which is our main blocker to mainnet, once that audit is complete, then yeah, you'll be able to know that anything you put inside of this, you can do freely with much fewer security considerations than forking the entire chain stack yourself.
That's extremely sick. That's super cool. Do you have anything else to show in this demo, or can I just ask you more questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think like let's chat about questions as we go. Like, here's one example where like right now the current moon phase is waning crescent, and what we said for this one is like you can only send transactions with a small value. So like maybe you want this whale resistant chain, and this whale resistant chain will like only allow through small value transactions. It won't allow large value transactions. And this is like literally inspecting the message.value. So maybe you're trying to, for example, do like a large transaction value. So like this one is like you're trying to do a large transaction. This one's going to fail. It's going to bounce back because you're trying to send too much. You're trying to send like a large amount on a whale resistant chain. But if you go to this one, which is basically saying it's a low value transaction, and you submit this one, now this one is allowed through, and this one's able to process, and like you can go check it out very easily on a block explorer right now. This is like one I sent through right beforehand, and then you can see that one makes its way through. So this is a nice example where like all of this logic is very simple to express. You could limit it to only certain contracts, like only game contracts. You could, or only certain function signatures. So like maybe in your case, you might have many, many contracts that are valid for intents, but maybe you want to limit a chain to like only the certain signatures on tokens that you're operating on.
You could even like a NASDAQ type chain, right? Let's say NASDAQ watches a rollup. They could just limit trading hours to between like certain timestamps, essentially, if they wanted to.
Exactly. They could say, yep, this chain is only open for a certain period of time. And like the blockchain could literally have operating hours, which, in a general purpose chain doesn't really make sense. Like if you're doing, liquidations for a lending protocol, like you want to be able to do the lending protocol liquidations 24/7. But if you're running, a business that is, for example, like doing, off-chain settlement to banks, maybe you do actually want your chain to only be up when the banks are up and to not be up when the banks aren't up. Because if you're intricately tied to you don't want the risk of, overnight transactions not settling when the banks come back. Or like if it's mirrored assets, like NASDAQ assets, like overnight when NASDAQ is not processing any transactions, then all of your mirrored assets will get out of whack because no one can arb them. Maybe that's a feature, maybe that's a bug. But if you view that as a bug, then you could ensure that it's only operating when the stock market's operating. Exactly.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I feel like my mind is racing with possibilities. Another thing I think about a lot is like, if you're on Coinbase Advanced or whatever, like you can trade, and after a certain amount of time, your fees go down. I'm sure you could figure out. I don't know if this you could do this, but like have a model where like an individual's transaction volume over some like monthly time horizon changes the actual like net formula they pay for the fee. Obviously, like you have to cover your call data costs, but the sequencer is also making like a mild profit off of you. And if they want to reward a user for loyalty, they could always like charge you less. I don't know if that's possible.
They could charge you less in gas fees, which is a little hard to do right now, but feasible. But they could also change your ordering. So the more loyal you are, for example, the higher up in the block you go. So like that could also
cool.
be its own incentive, like to be top of block for any new transactions, any new mints, any new trades. And the more you transact, which is good for the chain, like it's generating revenue for the chain, generating revenue for the app on top of the chain. The more you transact, the more the higher your transactions are prioritized.
That's
You can even
like
imagine like a delay, where like you get your transactions in faster, kind of like arbitrary time boost as well.
Yeah, it almost could be like a way to like auction off MEV too. Like you could have like there could be like a certain number of like tickets that you sell to like be the first person in the block to like take advantage of MEV, and so the sequencer could like theoretically sell those if it didn't want to claim it itself. Is that another like good example?
Yeah. So like that's one thing that's pretty cool about this being all smart contract based is you could run any auction mechanism you want for a block. So essentially what you have is you have transactions sequenced by smart contracts. So there's two ways you could approach that. One way is you say that sequencing can be done by anyone really broadly, like essentially decentralized sequencing where anyone can write to the contract. And that's a nice approach if you want to maximize decentralization and minimize the risk of liveness failures, minimize the risk of the centralized sequencer going down. That also generally makes your chain easier and cheaper to run because you don't need to maintain a bunch of sequencer failovers yourself. Anyone can sequence. So like you don't need to worry about you being the single source of uptime or downtime for the chain. In that case, if anyone can sequence, then it's kind of like very similar to Vitalik's original total anarchy vision of sequencing, where anyone can write to a sequencer at any time. And like that was his vision for how decentralized sequencing would happen. People have gradually moved away from it, mostly for gas fee reasons. But by running this on top of a rollup dedicated to sequencing, a syndicate chain that is purely a sequencing layer, you can get fees very low and like bring back Vitalik's original vision of sequencing. But you could also say like only one person's allowed to sequence. And like standard MEV is like it's a validator rotation in ETH POS, for example, where like 32 or 64 slots out, who will be the validator and they have the exclusive rights, and that's randomly chosen. But maybe you want to auction off the next sequencer for the next block. Maybe you want to auction off the next 30 minutes of blocks. Maybe you want like a harbinger tax where like you can be the sequencer, but someone else can always buy out your rights if you're not maintaining the continuous threshold. There's also like even a concept that's like out of Stanford Law School by a very talented professor there who focuses on governance. And like it's called contestable control, where basically other people can like essentially like outbid your sequencing rights at any point if they think they can do a better job sequencing than you do. So you can take the approach of like anyone can sequence at any time. You could take the approach of anyone can sequence if they meet the criteria for this block. Maybe they've staked a certain number of tokens. Maybe they've won an auction. Or you could even say like this one party is sequencing until, decided otherwise by whatever mechanism you want. And like there's lots of chains, like the vast majority of revenue for chains, like you look at basis revenue, it's 80 or 90% MEV revenue from dexes. But maybe you're not a chain that's a
Wow, is that
dex.
true? I didn't know that. That's crazy.
It's all priority fees to be at the top of the block. And
Wow.
it's vast majority is dex swaps. The base fees actually contribute a very small portion of their overall revenue. It's
Wow, that's crazy.
MEV from dex swaps, which is why they can bring the base fee very low. But then the flip side is like, they're the MEV is like from a very particular transaction type. But
That's kind
maybe
of crazy to
you're
think that like the users that are losing out from that MEV are the individuals who are subsidizing transactions on base. Like if you think about it that way, that's kind of crazy.
yeah. It feels like like credit card rewards, where like a large number of people get small benefits, and then a small number of people like really get a lot of downside. um,
Yeah, that's crazy.
yeah. Like if you're like just like run over on a high slippage swap or whatever else, but like maybe there's an MPV mechanism that's better for your unique use case. Maybe it's not priority fees. Maybe maybe it's a auction that lasts longer. Maybe it's prioritized ordering around a certain transaction type. Maybe
Mhm.
it's staking. I mean, in Nico's case, like we're jamming with you on a number of ideas. I'm not sure how much to leak that alpha or not. I will put that in your court. But essentially, like you could imagine a structure where like providing liquidity to eco also means that you're at the top of the block for any intents, and like that means that you're more likely to be able to fulfill them. So like there's this like really nice flywheel in providing liquidity, um, especially if you can provide liquidity with atomic conclusion and like locking until execution, which is what we offer as well. So like there's a bunch of ways that we're like the way we've designed rollups today basically assumes that there's a large amount of DEX usage and that people are making money off of like transaction fees related to slippage, priority fees related to slippage, and like that's like basically how ETH mainnet is making money for proof of stake for the most part, not exclusively. That's how Base is making money, but there's a lot of things that are not DEXs, and that could be customized in all sorts of ways to be a far better fit for those use cases.
Before I get into some of the questions I already have written down, one like other question that comes to mind: would it be possible to use like many custom gas tokens this way too? Like one thing I find is a huge limitations of rollups as they exist now. If let's say you're a rollup and you want to have like a stablecoin gas token, well, you have to choose
Mm-hmm.
one of the stablecoins to use. You can't like there. You could have in your rollup theoretically like hundreds of stablecoins, and it's very unintuitive for
Yeah.
the user not to be able to pay in them all. Is that like something else that you could customize with this?
Yeah, so like in this case, like for this demo, the network is ETH, but you can use a custom gas token as well. And then the cool part about this is that you can start to so when people are doing custom gas tokens, we tend to recommend that they handle custom gas tokens via wrapper contract. So one example is like you could have a bridge where it's a where the bridge is a like multi-stablecoin token. So you create a wrapper token where like you deposit $1 of USDC or $1 of USDT, and you'll get out a like multi-stable wrapper, and then that multi-stable wrapper becomes the bridge token. So that way you can freely customize your bridge token via smart contracts, because then all of the smart contracts are in this wrapper token layer, and you can freely customize your sequencing logic via this token. So then combined together, you can basically customize your gas token anytime you want, and you can customize your sequencing logic anytime you want. And you could
If I
even say for example, like if one stablecoin breaks the peg, like actually like you want to halt transaction processing until the peg is restored, or you want to disallow deposits in that stablecoin until that peg is restored. You want to disallow withdrawals of that stablecoin until the peg is restored. You could imagine like all these safety valves for networks that rely on off-chain collateral.
Yeah, maybe like I'm even thinking like if I'm understanding it right, you deposit it into the wrapper, and then the other side, when the token is like distributed to the user on the chain, they actually get USDT or USDC, and the only time they can like re-enter this wrapper is when they're withdrawing from the rollup or they're paying gas with it. They can't actually natively hold the wrap token, and you can like govern those laws, I guess you could say, about how that like wrapper interaction occurs via this like uh, essentially these like on-chain rules. That's super cool. Okay, a couple. Now that we've talked about a bunch of like random use cases, what are some of the unique cases that you're like interested in for community? Like, I guess like community-owned app chains is the way that you say it, but like, what are some of the coolest use cases that you see people excited to build around?
Yeah. So there's a bunch of groups that we've already announced that we're working with that we're quite excited by. Some groups that we haven't announced that I'll just speak of broadly as categories. So some groups that we're working with include, for example, Dream, which is building an AI agent only blockchain. So they only allow you on if you're an approved AI agent. So kind of like how WorldCoin is like it's a blockchain where like if you're a human, you're at the top of the block. You can imagine Dream being like you're either only allowed onto this chain if you're an AI agent, or like AI actually goes before humans, which is a fun interpretation. We're working with a number of groups doing events in person. One group is Refraction/IRL, but there's other groups we're working with in the ticketing space and event space. And in that case, you can imagine customizing the ordering of transactions so that for like highly, highly competitive concert tickets, the most loyal users, the most loyal fans, like go to the top of the block.
Oh, that's so interesting. Like, let's say you just like pull my Spotify history. I don't know. You can. I guess Spotify would have to
You
attest
could
to
with
it.
ZK-TLS. You can
Yeah,
even
exactly.
enshrine Oracle data inside of our platform. So like you could say that every single transaction related to a concert ticket, the sequencer will programmatically insert a transaction beforehand that refreshes your Spotify data. So like instead of having to have an Oracle that's like constantly updating in the background, or instead of having to have like a multi-block Oracle model where you have to like make a call for updated data and then have it be fulfilled, you could literally just have a sequencer insert it before every single transaction so that it's always up to date.
That's so cool.
Yeah. You could do the same thing with randomness for a game. It's like we're working on our own small prototype of like, a small fun clicker game. And that game will involve randomness inserted by the sequencer prior to every single transaction. It's like you don't need to set up a very heavy VRF, and you don't need to worry about like Oracle data going stale. It will just say that like for every transaction to be processed, there must be provable randomness right beforehand from like DRAM that's verified via like any kind of verification system you would like.
That is so sick. I have, yeah, I have so many thoughts about the music one specifically because the sniping thing is such a problem.
Yes.
That's very cool. I guess like philosophically, why are you focused on communities? Like what and why are you like focused on that toolkit for communities in general?
Yeah, I mean, personally, like I'm very, very worried about the re-centralization of Ethereum. So like Ethereum, as it exists today, is like a very, very decentralized network, which is excellent for settlement, excellent for DA. I think excellent for smart contracts too, but there's a bunch of use cases where that does get cost prohibitive. And Ethereum is mostly shifted to the rollup centric roadmap as it's been working on for a number of years now, and everything's going to rollups with centralized sequencers that are off chain. And there's actually a lot of centralization throughout the rollup stacks. Like fraud proofs are a lot more centralized than people think. The bridges have upgrade keys. And the sequencer is like one party that must stay online. And you can't even circumvent the sequencer easily because the sequencer can actually always front run you. So like even sequencer circumvention is not censorship resistant if you're doing anything besides like a plain value transfer. Like a DEX swap, it could front run you so it always fails, for example, so that you can never get your tokens out. And in these cases, we like you basically move from like this wonderful decentralized on-chain system to this like opaque off-chain system that you just have to trust people to do the right thing. And I think generally like the rollups so far that are large are good stewards of the ecosystem. But like if we wanted to have trust assumptions, like we should just go really aggressively in the scalability direction, like as Solana and Mega ETH and Monad and others are. So you're in this like odd situation where like kind of have the worst of both worlds in the Ethereum ecosystem right now. Like you have decentralization on the L1 that is positioning itself as in many ways like a settlement and DA layer, and then you have a heavy degree of centralization on the L2, and like that just goes to private companies. Like sometimes that goes to retro PGF, but sometimes that doesn't. And what we want to do is we want to basically like ensure that Ethereum has this community ownership and accountability throughout the whole stack. So like we don't want to have rollups have trust assumptions that the sequencer won't censor you, or that like the entity that's running the sequencer will like do the right thing with the fees, or that the transaction fees that you pay will like actually benefit developers. Like you should be able to encode that in rules and encode that in how transactions are sequenced and how fees are distributed. So philosophically, like we're quite committed to essentially like trying to preserve a lot of those benefits of decentralization that rollups lost, while still being pragmatic. Like we call it on-chain sequencing, where it's very much not base sequencing. Like we are sequencing to a layer 2, and like you can fork that layer 2 and you can run your own layer 2, and we're looking at ways to decentralize the layer 2. But like there's some pragmatism involved too. Like we know that like if the UX is worse and the gas fees are higher, people won't use this. But we do think that we can inject, multiple sequencers, transparent ordering rules, community control over chain parameters, in a way that is like thoughtful but doesn't compromise the user experience.
Yeah, that's such a good answer. I am also extremely concerned about that. I just think there's so much like there's so many levels of abstraction and narrative that get like pushed onto what an L2 should be, and then like it's somewhat different in reality. Not even somewhat, it is different in reality than what the L2s actually are. And so like I like I'm a huge fan of Ethereum, but like the one thing that Solana does well, and I think like ETH is competing directly with Solana at this point. It even though it has the centralization risks, like you don't have to deal with these other layered, more abstract risks that become exponential as the complexity increases, right? Like, and so, yeah, I'm very concerned about that too. And there's so many scenarios I always think with some of these like smaller L2s or L3s where I'm like, one of these is just going to brick one day, and somebody's not going to have the data availability, and the data availability community is not going to have it, and the change is going to freeze, and who knows what's going to happen in that situation. But yeah, I'm very concerned about that as well.
Right, right. I mean, it's like the benefit of crypto is that you really like crypto done well. There should not be any button that is like press this and get an arbitrary amount of money at the cost of your users, because like someone will press that button when it reaches a certain point. So like I don't know what the threshold is for a centralized rollup, a centralized sequencer, and a multi-sig for that's like the guardian for fraud proofs and an upgradable bridge. But like there's a button that most actors will press if they can make a certain amount of money at the expense of their users, especially like publicly traded companies that are accountable to their shareholders, and like they do have to tell the community like just trust us because there isn't an alternative.
And even if they don't want to press the button, like that recent Gnosis safe hack was so crazy, where they like had injected essentially like a false transaction into Gnosis Safe's front end that looked legitimate. So like you know what I mean? Like even if there is a signature that gets pushed, like it's not just a risk of the individuals themselves. There are the risks compounded of like those individuals being compromised or being forced to do things by the government or by some arbitrary state actor. I think like the risks are, yeah, yeah. I totally
Exactly.
agree.
And like you don't want a button that exists that says like the sequencer will start, censoring the transactions at, for this reason, or the sequencer will start front running transactions for that reason, or like fraud proofs. The fraud proof systems go to a multi-sig. Like there's a bond system initially, but it's actually like a multi-sig can override it. You don't want that like break glass button to override a fraud proof and allow an invalid withdrawal to exist. You want it to be, as hard to access possible. And a lot of the TVL and rollups is on stage 0 rollups, and some on stage 1 rollups. Like there are a lot of groups that have done good efforts for security in terms of what they can do right now. Like Arbitrum has time locks for upgrades, which is really nice. Like Optimism has security councils that contain multiple like independent parties, which is good. But like there's still, necessary centralization. And if everything on Ethereum moves to rollups and the L1 becomes just this place for settlement and nothing else, then like what set of compromises are we left with? We are left with an L1 that doesn't scale, and we're left with L2s that are centralized. And at a certain point, people will start looking at, oh, what about like L1s that do scale? Or hopefully, in our view, what about L2s that are more decentralized? That would also be a nice world to live in.
For sure, absolutely. Okay, this is such a good talk. Well, if developers want to build on Syndicate, where should they jump in? How can they get in contact with Syndicate?
Yeah, definitely. So we have docs live that I can do a quick. I'm not going to walk through, but we have docs live at docs.syndicate.io. People can check it out. We have nice architecture diagrams, a little bit about like why you should build app chains, how our stack works, things like that, and then like compared to other approaches and like specifically a deep dive into on-chain sequencing. We haven't documented the demo, so you can like go into a deep dive of how the demo works. So that's a good place to start. And then they can DM me. I'm at Will Papper on Twitter and Telegram. I'm at Will on Farcaster, or just Will at syndicate.io. And we can absolutely dive in from there. This is a very new primitive, very emergent. So like, there's no idea that's too crazy. No idea that like is uninteresting. It's very much something where like if someone has a unique way to think about this kind of chain customization and the benefits of making this more horizontally scalable, more decentralized, more transparent and accountable, then that's excellent. Would love to dive in with them.
Yeah, that's so sick. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Will. My mind is still racing with like ideas for what could be done. Well, I feel like it needs to be like a awesome Syndicate demo GitHub repo for all the cool things people can build. But cool. Well, thank you so much, Will, and thanks for tuning in to Build on Chain. See you.
Thanks
all
so much,
next time.
Christian.